So the first question is, I would like to find out from you something that inspires you.
The water. That might sound really strange, but it humbles me. It reminds me that I find it quite magnificent, the sea in particular, how powerful it is and also gentle at the same time, soothing. I love the sound. Yeah, I would say the sea, Mother Nature.
Finding it for when you need it.
Yes.
And what about something, actually, it does say here, something that you find uninspiring?
I mean, that's a longer list. I find ignorance uninspiring. I find unseasoned food.
What about you, Casey?
I don't know if I can match unseasoned food. Unseasoned food is uninspiring and uninspired all at once.
Yes.
So being a teacher, I think what I find inspiring is young people. The young people that we encounter and work with every day. I just feel like there's so much hope for change, development, growth within them that we often lose as we get a little bit older. We get a bit jaded and we get tied into ideologies or our wounds and our issues and our trauma and all of that stuff, and we just end up becoming bogged down in this won't work or that won't work, or I tried before, so I'm not going to try again. And so many young people just have the kind of power to go, no, I'm going to do this, or why don't you do that? And you go, oh yeah, why didn't we do that? Because they haven't looked at it through the lens of blockers and issues and problems and barriers. They've just gone, isn't that the solution? And you go, maybe that is the solution. So I find that infinitely inspiring. Uninspiring, wow. Adults, no. Sorry, adults. Uninspiring. I think often rules, it's my job to put rules in place. I literally am in charge of all of the rules in the building that I work in. But I find them very uninspiring, not just because they're limiting, but because often there's no nuance in rules. So when you look at, you can do this or you can't do this, normally you would, if you had logic and you looked at individuals, you go, you should probably be able to do that actually. And maybe you shouldn't do even more of that. But we end up with, a blanket, these are the rules, stick to the rules. And I find that very uninspiring.
Absolutely. And having two kids in secondary school at the moment, I've got a 15 and a 13-year-old. I am with you.
And I apologise.
Yes.
It's us, it's the teachers.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because whenever I'm trying to talk to my children about it, it is that whole kind of juxtaposition of, yes, I know it's uninspiring. Yes, I know all of these things, but go to school.
Yeah.
So that's really, really hard as well. And as the great late Whitney said, children are our future, right? And treat them well and let them lead the way. Yeah. So, we must do better. And what about you, Amelia?
Well, at the moment, so being the 30th of September, I'm working in the mental health space, running a mental health charity. September's been a very busy month with World Suicide Prevention Day. And I've decided to turn something that was frustrating me into something that's inspiring me, which is the immaturity of the sector, right? This space, the mental health space, is still quite immature. And that was frustrating me. And I was like, why don't we know this? Why don't we have the skills? And actually, when you look at it from an inspirational level of going, God, there's so much new stuff happening. There are so many new people coming in. There are so many events like this that are happening, that actually I'm leaving the month being so inspired about the fact that this is really exciting, because all of us in it now, we're like really at that beginning part of some of the stuff that's happening, which just feels really inspiring. Uninspiring for me, I've got one that I always feel, I'm very inquisitive. I need to know why things are the way that they are. And I hate it when I get the response, because that's the way that it's always been. I find it so uninspiring. I'm like, that is not even an answer. I don't understand. So that would be mine.
Yeah, that kind of talks back to that. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got mentality, right? That nothing will change unless we challenge the change. We challenge things to be able to change. Yeah, great. Awesome. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about now is resilience. How many of you have heard the word resilience? You hear it quite a lot, right? Yeah. So specifically around resilience in racialized communities, about being strong and bouncing back and having this idea. With that in mind, what are your thoughts on resilience as a concept or as a kind of a lived experience or a need or something that we have to do? It'll be quite interesting. What about you, Casey? I'll go start with you first.
Yeah, I think resilience can be a bit of a trap. And my kind of viewpoint on life, I guess, as well as being a teacher, I'm a father. And my viewpoint on life is that I need to raise my children to build the world that we should have, but to survive in the world that we do. When you hear about resilience, you hear it from somebody who doesn't have an issue or doesn't have a problem, telling someone who is dealing with an issue, surviving through an issue, struggling for an issue, you just need a bit of resilience. Yeah. You just need a bit of resilience. I know what you need, a bit of resilience. And almost always, they've never even been through the problem that the person's going through. Yeah. So they're like prescribing resilience like it's paracetamol, it's going to take away your headache. But it's not. And actually, we get so locked into the idea of being resilient, we stop being resistant. We stop saying, actually, I don't want to be resilient to racism. Why don't you stop being racist? So, as a concept, why don't we do that instead? And so I think resilience is really important because we do have to be able to survive through what we're going through to get to where we're going. But it's important that we don't come locked in this idea of, no, tough it out. Just stay there and tough it out. And bounce back, you'll be all right. And all that stuff. Because actually sometimes we need to go, no, I don't want to be resilient to nonsense. Let's just stop the nonsense from that. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Lovely. Thank you so much. What about you, Amelia?
So when I saw the subject of the panel, like resilience for me brings up like two words. One is exhaustion, right? Because like resilience really demonstrates the fact that there are multiple knocks, like bringing up my own lived experience, and this would be the grief that I went through, suicide-related grief after my mum died. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go into therapy, which I vouch for all the time, love it. Oh, I'm in a really strong place. Oh no, I've been hit by a wave of grief. I've been hit by a trigger. I've been hit by this or something at work. Oh, cool. So I'm going to have to go through another new level of coping skills, right? And this like resilience is portrayed in that good way, but actually for me the word exhaustion really comes up because I think it's just a recognition of like, it's a demonstration we're on a long journey, everybody's lives, we're going to have these multiple barriers to jump. And the other word for me that is how I can do resilience is the most boring word, which is moderation. Like it's taken me ages. I'm a real all or nothing person, or exercise or no drinking or whatever, or workaholic, which I still am. But moderation for me is actually how I like manage to carry on with like happiness and joy and fun and social. But for me to be able to be resilient through things that get thrown at me all the time, especially running a mental health charity or whatever, it's moderation, which I think is such a boring word, but really important.
It's interesting. So you've talked about exhaustion and you've talked about resistance as part of resilience. So Nova.
To echo what both Casey and Amelia said, like the idea of resilience is that it's not that we are not impacted when traumatic experiences or hard times happen to us. It's our ability to bounce back, I guess. And I do think there is a more of a risk for us who are racialised as Black, particularly the Black women and girls and femmes in the room, that we often see our caretakers, particularly the women, just overriding, pushing through, being all things to all people, not stopping, not recovering. And so for me, resilience isn't necessarily about pushing through. It's about being able to almost surrender to what is going on, to recognise what it is that you need, to be able to ask for your needs to be met in those moments so that you can actually recover, rather than continue on this perpetual cycle that leads to burnout and mental ill health. So for me, my lesson in resilience is learning to say no, being okay with saying no, being okay with the prospect of not being liked because I've said no, and starting to take care of my needs first in a way where I don't feel like I'm a bad person or that I'm selfish, but because like we all deserve to have basic needs met, and so many of us don't have those basic needs met. So that's my relationship with the word.
With the resilience, yeah. And actually, I think sometimes people have gone through really difficult times in their life and probably wouldn't even see themselves as resilient. They've just coped.
Yeah.
You know, they've managed to get through. They've lived a really difficult childhood, for example, and they've grown into adults that are functioning, perhaps, that maybe need to revisit some therapy for the things that they've undergone in their childhood, but they would never probably class themselves as resilient. They wouldn't maybe connect to that word. They said, you know what, there wasn't anything resilient about it. I just had to get up every day. I had my little brothers to look after, or I had my sisters to look after. And so, you know, utilising those labels, sometimes people can't connect to them, perhaps as much as we can. Okay, and actually you touched on some of them a little bit, but coping strategies. What coping strategies have you put in place that allow you to manage the difficult situations in your life? This one's going to be quite interesting because somebody said earlier on, I think it was one of our other esteemed guests that was talking about kind of putting things in place, and I didn't hear what was my coping strategy, which was watching SWAT. Has anyone ever seen SWAT? You've seen SWAT? Yeah, so that's really, really high production, American, you know, police drama. Fantastic. But that's what my downtime is chill. I might want to do something that's not in the mental health space, or, you know, or sit by the river, or whatever that may or may not be. But what coping strategies have you got in place that help you navigate difficult times? I'm going to start with you, Amelia.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to what I was saying about moderation. I've learned that I need like a balance of different things in my life. So I'm an extrovert. I love social time. And when I close myself off from that, it's not good. I love exercise, eating, you know, lots of different things. I also journal. I've been accessing professional support multiple times. So for me, a coping strategy when it comes to resilience is I actually have to just do a bit of a check, probably bi-weekly, on where I'm at. Now, I am working a job in the mental health space, but I literally write a list of being like, what have I actually done? And it's not just like, did I journal or did I do this? And I form new habits the entire time as well. But one of my coping strategies is having this like drumbeat of like, let's just write a list. Like it literally could be on my notes on my phone, or it could be on work, just so that I can like actually remind myself and not hide like from myself. Because I think, like you said, how people wouldn't necessarily look back and say they were resilient, right? It's because often we just don't take the time to look back and analyse what we've just done, how strong we were, how supportive we were, what was good, or actually I was partying hard at that time. You know, like we don't like look back at it and learn. And so this list mechanism for me is something that allows me to do that, because I do like variety. I do loads of different things. I'll read a book and be like, I am going to do this new method for 3 months and then I'm never going to do it again. So that's what I do.
So it just depends on the...
Yeah, it's just like, but it's more the self-check. It's more the like, my version of a list is just to be like, what have I done? You know, just because there's big variety. And I do count social things and I count relationships and all of that stuff within that.
Excellent, thank you. And what about you, Casey?
I guess my main coping strategy is writing. So I started writing because I didn't know how to process what was going on around me other than to write it down. And I started writing lyrics and trying to be Tupac. I started there, and I'm still there in many ways, because there's so much that we can understand through the lens of writing something down. And often we don't actually know what it is until we look at it or look back at it and go, okay, that's actually how I was feeling, or whatever the case may be. So for me, that's my main coping strategy, is to write. But also I have a couple of kind of trusted friends in different spaces that I'll just call up. But I've got a friend who I taught with for 5 years, who whenever something happens in education and I think, I can't believe this is what's happened today for this young person or for this situation, I'll call her up and I'll say, listen, I can't believe what I've heard today. And I'll go through it and she'll remind me the stuff that we both know about education. Okay, I'm not going wild. Like this is a problem, but I can get back to it tomorrow. So those are my kind of main coping strategies. I lean on people who I know I can trust, and I write.
Excellent. I think it's really important, actually, just to follow on from what you've just said about calling on people. You must find yourself somebody that you can trust and you can speak to. And that's not everyone. Exactly like you, Amelia. I'm a massive extrovert, love people. Lockdown for me was one of the hardest times in my entire life. And actually, the interesting thing was nobody called on me. And why do you think they didn't call on me as an extrovert? Because I don't need anyone. I'm there for everybody else, right? So call on people and make sure you hold on to them nut gold dust. And just to follow up on that really quickly, who are you for other people?
Thank you for sharing that, Danielle. You know, it's hard to ask for help sometimes, or it's hard to tell people that you're struggling, or that you don't feel good, or that you're feeling vulnerable. And I think the worst thing that can happen is to tell that person and then to not be held or supported by them. So it is vital in finding that support network. And it can be really hard and quite lonely. I just want to acknowledge that. So the things that I find is also that support network. And I'm a voice noter.
Yay!
Help me process. If something's happened, I process what's happened. I don't always process what's happened to me in the moment. I need a bit of time. Like I'm dyslexic, so I need a little bit more processing time. And voice notes are great for me in processing and just helping get something off my chest. There's a great friend of mine. I found my soul sister. The longest voice note she left me is 59 minutes. Some of us, especially those of us who've been silenced or we're not often heard.
Yeah.
I have playlists I make for depending on what my mood is, and I play those. I dance a lot. I used to dance professionally, so I just dance for myself. I write and I swim. I used to be really scared of swimming. I was taught how to swim as a child, so the fear definitely was not mine, and it wasn't rational. But I was scared of the sea, particularly of drowning. And I was on holiday and met someone who happened to be a lifeguard, and he said, "Would you like me to teach you how to swim in the sea?" I said, "No, I'm good." And every day he asked, gently, every day he asked, and every day I said no, up until about 4 days before I was due to go home. And he took me out on a canoe with a life jacket and everything. And he helped me come out into the water. And he said, "I'm going to teach you how to be held by the water." And he taught me how to just float on my back and to remind myself how to swim, because I know how to swim. And now I swim 3 times a week. So those sorts of things are great for me, learning to be held by the water.
I need the name of that person.
Arthur.
Because the second I go on my back in the water,
Panic.
I panic. Yeah, and I start like sinking. It's not pretty. Thank you for sharing. Okay, this one actually, Nova, is directed specifically at you, and it's just because of your expertise in this particular field. But when we talk about coping strategies as individuals, we had some fantastic examples there, and we shared some fantastic examples with the guests. But when we talk about coping strategies as a racialized community, that's something a little bit different. And as it's your area of expertise, could you please, what would you think about that? How can we kind of look after ourselves and think about coping strategies within our own communities?
So I'm going to speak very specifically to those of us who have lineage lost to slavery. For those of us who have a violent history and lineage lost to slavery, generationally and intergenerationally, as a community, we've not had autonomy over ourselves. We have been owned. So no autonomy over words, no autonomy over behaviour, and this feeling like we need to do things for all people, to be subversive, to be, to do as we're told. So I talk a lot about boundaries and why they're so important specifically for us, because to talk back or to say no historically had significant consequences, including death. And we don't just forget, like, even though that might not be our own individual experience, like, we sometimes see it when we see a Black person speaking out, this visceral fear that there's going to be woe betide them. So for me, cultivating and learning how to set boundaries, how to say no, even with family, like, I'm the only girl in my family, and if there's something kicking off, I'm the one that has to, everyone always comes to me, even though I've got a bigger brother who's more than capable of pulling his weight. Well, Nova, the burden always falls on me. And so I had to start saying no. And like, I'm sweating. I'm like, my anxiety is increasing. There is a power in saying no, and it is vital for our mental health and our well-being to start to like intentionally curate autonomy over ourselves, over our words, not having people tone police what we say. No, this is what I meant to say. And just feeling confident and assured in that. Not, we can do that respectfully, but I think there's something culturally and generationally really important about owning the power of your no, and kind of reclaiming your autonomy.
I love that. And just as an example, if anybody's not following Nova on social media, please do it. I have never seen a more clear directive around boundaries than your social media page. I mean, like, I think actually you point people to one of your highlights, which is like page after page of this is what I will engage in, this is what I won't. There will be no conversations around it. It's just clear. And I have signposted people to that as a way of highlighting their own boundaries when people find it difficult, because it's upfront communication, isn't it? It's upfront.
It's upfront communication, and don't get me wrong, sometimes I violate my own boundaries. Like I will say, let me use something frivolous. I will say, right, I'm finishing my working day at 5, and then 7 p.m. I'm still working. So I'm undermining my own boundaries, right? I'm not developing trust in myself. So but it's so important, because I think also it teaches people how to treat us. And the upfront boundaries mean, like, I've been clear. And you have a choice, that the other person or the other party or people have a choice as to whether they engage with those or not. And they can say, that doesn't work for me. But instead they try and push you to deflect on your boundaries. And it's a constant no, I won't debate. I'm not debating. It's a no. No, but can you do this for me? No. No is a whole sentence. We don't need to, yes, but we don't need to give a whole explanation. Like, no is enough. And it doesn't mean that we don't care or we're not good people. Like, it's for our mental health and our well-being first. So,
and do you think that your 17-year-old self had those same boundaries, or is that how wisdom has been created as you've kind of grown through your life?
A lot of wisdom. Like my boundaries were violated at a young age, and as a result of that, my work around boundaries is necessary, and it will probably be work I have to do until the day that I die. But I think my 7-year-old self would probably be really proud of me now. So yeah,
love that. Love that. And Casey, what about you in terms of boundaries and for yourself?
I just want a moment for no is a whole sentence.
Yeah.
What a bar.
Is that going one of your songs now?
That's going to be like my book title. No is a whole sentence. I mean, I think boundaries they're important, because I think what Nova said is actually captured it. It teaches people how to interact with you. And you only have to watch somebody walk into a room and how they deal with 4 different people that they know, and how they deal with them all differently, to know what they've been allowed to get away with, or what they've been told they can't get away with in different scenarios. And I also think there's a power in who different boundaries do not apply to. So, for example, there are things that people can say to me, and there are things that other people can't say to me. And I guess growing up, I grew up quite close to here, and I grew up in a gang culture, and you would have people say, like, don't call me by my government name, you don't know me. Don't show up at my house, you don't know me like that. And I remember I did a panel about being an artist, and I was talking about a call that I got from the BBC. And I got a call, and the person said, "Hi, Case, this is Sarah from the BBC." And I said, "How did you get this number?" And everybody in the room was like, "That's what you said?" And I was like, yes, because I didn't give her my number. So... so I need information. Who gave you my number? Because I will talk to you, but I might not talk to them. That shocked everyone. But I was like, I want to know, because where I come from, you don't call up somebody that didn't give you their number yourself, because I would just lock off the phone call. So what's happening? And even in that phone call, and it's something I talk about a lot, my son had been born 2 days before. And the BBC were asking me to write something related to the Commonwealth Games. And I'd already had a big conversation about the Commonwealth Games with somebody else. And I said, listen, we're close to the date, the deadline soon. I'm not going to write anything where I can't talk about the generational trauma that is tied to this idea of Commonwealth. If I can't call it out, if I can't say this, if I can't say that, then I'm not going to write it. I don't mean to be blunt. My wife has asked me to go and get nappies. If that's not what you want, let me know and I can recommend someone to you. She was like, oh no, Casey, that's exactly what I want. I was like, okay, cool. You're going to need to call me back tomorrow because I got to go and get these nappies. Like, things are happening around here. And that was that. But a lot of people were quite shocked by that. And I need people to know I don't expect you to just call my phone. Not when I've got a website and an email address.
Absolutely. I love that.
So yeah, I think boundaries are really important in that respect. Absolutely.
It's interesting. I think is it Black History Month next month?
Oh.
Is it?
Is it tomorrow?
I mean, does it start tomorrow?
Are the emails blowing up yet?
Are the emails really busy? Yeah, again, that whole kind of idea of doing stuff just for, no, it's quite a liberating sentence.
No, it's a whole
sentence, right? Love that.
I'm carrying it with me.
And Amelia, what about your own boundaries?
Yeah, I think I've done a lot of work on boundaries. I'm still working on it. I definitely don't have a strict rules with my phone, but I wish I did. I think I had an experience like 2 years ago, having started Suicide&Co in 2020. We started at the same time as Black Minds Matter. I thought it was going to be a side hustle. I found myself so overwhelmed whilst doing my day job in this whole new space. And capitalizing on momentum, like I just lost all my boundaries. Everything was a yes, everything. I wanted to grow it. There were people suffering. We had a wait list and everything was a yes. And I burnt out completely. When I did that, I felt like I didn't have a single boundary. And yet I was probably the most isolated I'd ever been through like a huge boundary just like around me. Do you know, it was the weirdest thing. I was like, I've got to this place because I haven't had any, and yet I'm all on my own in this thing. So I practice it now a lot more, and I bring it into my team dynamic. And the main time I talk about boundaries at the moment is with mental health and supporting others. So I think, lots of people freak out about the fact that if they know or can sense someone suffering, that if they start a conversation, they don't know what to say, they don't know the right thing, they don't want to upset the person more, etc. I think learning the boundaries of how to have a conversation, which is essentially just like listening and then signposting, and being really secure in the fact that like you're not there to solve that person's problem, to be the therapist, to give the advice. You're there to listen and then literally say, I've heard of this epic charity called Black Minds Matter. That's it. So I think it's like in that way when they're so empowering when you have them, right? And like that's the biggest thing. It's like it can open so many more conversations when they are there.
I love that. And I love the fact that you brought up boundaries in within conversations, because that's so important. I don't know if anyone's ever had conversations where they've been given so much advice by others. Oh, yeah, that happened to me. I think you should do blah, 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 blah. Which are often quite dangerous, and actually having those boundaries in place. Moving on to the fourth question now. So what did success look like to you when you were growing up, and has it changed? Okay, so start with you. It's a great question.
Wow. When I was young, success looked like having lots of money. And that was it. Yay. And whilst I'm sure that's nice, I think for me now, success is just very much tied into happiness. And weirdly, I guess, and maybe it's like a negative place to operate from, but it's being happy and doing no harm.
Yeah.
So if I can be as happy as I can without mashing up anything for anybody else, then I'm successful. And I say that because I see, especially in education, especially as a teacher, I see harm done on a regular basis by people who maybe never had the intention to do any harm, or maybe it's not why they do what they do, but harm is done. And to me, that's the biggest failure, to come out of a situation and go, I was in a situation where everything could have just stayed as it was, and I've somehow made it worse for someone, is the biggest failure. So success is tied around not doing any harm, and then being happy. And for me, so people often talk to me about leaving teaching because I do quite well outside of teaching, or stopping this or stopping that. At the moment, everything I do brings me joy. And while it keeps bringing me joy, I'm going to keep doing it, and it's important. For me, all of the work that I do is really important. So success comes around doing work that I think is important, that makes me happy, and where I'm not troubling anybody or messing up anybody's life or saying anything that's gonna impact anyone in a negative way. And then all the rest of the stuff is a bonus and an extra.
So do you do training courses for other teachers?
Yeah.
Like, seriously. Because if only that was a trait, if only that was a desire for the majority of people in the education system, who I understand have been, you know, it's a lot, they're tired, there's an awful lot of, you know, kickback from stuff. But if only every teacher had that kind of mentality, then, you know.
I think that I literally did training for my staff at my school this week on do no harm approaches. But I think all of that, we are tired and it is stressful and difficult, but it's very rarely because of the kids that we work with. Yeah. So I cannot, one thing I try very, very hard to do is never pass on something to someone who it's not for. So if I come here today and you make me mad, I'm not going to go home and be mad at my kids. And I think a lot of us make that mistake of like, well, I'm in a bad mood. Oh, it's got nothing to do with me. And then we just carry that around like, well, this happened, so you're getting it and you're getting it. And that's problematic in day-to-day life, but it's particularly problematic when the person in front of you is a 13-year-old who hasn't done anything to you or has done something that you might find offensive or challenging, but they're still a 13-year-old standing in front of you. That's right. I'm fortunate that I have the benefit that I remember 15-year-old me, and most people are not as troublesome as him. So I kind of go, well, you know, could be worse. So at least I don't have to teach me. So I just kind of go, we'll get there. And I think they will get there. And I think most young people will get there. And the other harm that we do in education, which is really damaging, is we have an education system where literally everybody can't pass because of the way it's designed. And then we spend 11 years telling people that passing is the most important thing in the world. If you don't pass these exams. And I've met children at 11 years old who, with the best will in the world, maybe will never pass their English GCSE, but could go on and do amazing things in life. And instead of saying to them, you know, you're wonderful at this, you're amazing at that, and my favourite poet is dyslexic and didn't pass their GCSE in English, and my favourite artist is this, we go, you got to pass, you got to pass, you got to pass. Because we're scared to let the people who can pass know that not passing isn't the end of anything. Yes. So we drive them all together, and then at the end we go, oh, well, don't worry about it. What do you mean not worry about it? You've been telling me for 10 years. This is it. And then we try and pick them up on results day and go, it's fine. Yes. It's not fine, miss, because you told me for 5 years it's not going to be fine. Yeah. And that's really harmful. And then we have a society of young people where 30, 40, 50% come out of schools as failures. And then we want them to go into the world and contribute, which they probably would have been able to if we never spent so long telling them there was only one way to contribute.
Oh, don't, because I think we could talk about this forever. Yeah. Honestly, I think that's just a whole vibe on its own and a really needed conversation. But we must move on. Thank you so much for that, Casey. Yeah, really, really fascinating. Your definition of success then, Amelia?
Well, very similar. Mine used to be about making money, and then I started a charity and that all went down the drain. Don't go into the charity sector if you want to make loads of money. So mine has changed, I guess, in an overall thing at the moment, definitely around like success for me now feels like when I have purpose, but I have a very specific purpose. I'm very motivated by it, and I feel very lucky and privileged to be, you know, working in somewhere where my purpose is. But I guess the biggest measure I have at the moment was some advice from another a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur. And he was just going through the ups and the downs of like, it's either bad, good, or great. And it's like, we're always striving for great. And actually, he's like, I've got really comfy and good. Like success is when things are good, because when things are bad, like bad is like, you know, not great. But then when we're constantly striving for this like great, then the good doesn't feel like good. And so like now I'm like, my success is when it's good. And so like we actively say to each other like, yeah, how's work going? And I'm like, good. And he's like, okay, good. And it's like, right, well, that's it. It doesn't sound very exciting. And, you know, charity's going very fast. His business is growing fast. But instead of talking in this like high level, like A-star attitude, like the top of the, you know, just being like, it is good. Whether it's like that or whether it's just good, you know, because then that I think as a frame for success feels like it's going to occupy more of your space
unattainable
than the other. Because if the success is great, there's not going to be that much of your actual time.
Nice. So success is good.
It's good.
We like that. That's good. Thank you. And what about you, Nova? Your definition of success?
It certainly morphs and evolves over time, but for me, anything that brings me joy and ease and freedom and space to be myself and to exhale, I want to be striving for that. And we're socialized to think, exactly as Casey said, there's only one way to achieve success, is to get these grades, to have the money, to potentially be married, like all of these markers or to have a house, all of these markers that superficially symbolize success. I'll give a short example. When I wrote my book, it's really interesting that when you become a published author, somehow you're more credible than you were before. It's like, but I've been talking about this, I've been talking about this stuff for years. I've been doing this work for years, but suddenly as an author, I find it problematic. But anyway, I'm just observing. And the industry is very interested in terms of also like social media, what your follower count is and how many sales you've made. And I'm like, but how's your author's mental health? Are they motivated to write another book again, or to share more stories that impact other people, or are they burned out? So for me, there's got to be wellness in that. There's, when the time comes, and, I'm at the age now where I'm having to bury some of my friends, and, I had to write a eulogy for my best friend a few years ago, and that's not what you're talking about. That's not what you remember. You remember the impact that this person had on your life. And yes, the impact they may have had on the legacy that they've left in wider society. But isn't what, she had a house, and none of that matters. So for me, it's the joy, it's the feeling, it's, the connections that we make with one another, and that our well-being is centered somewhere in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've just remembered something that my dad said to me this morning. He always says something wise, and he was talking to me about success today. And he said, remember, Elon Musk's a billionaire, and that man's trying to find himself somewhere in space because he can't find happiness on Earth. He said, if you only strive for that, you'll always be striving. Yes. And I'm like, Dad, that is a good point. Yes. And I hope he finds somewhere on space personally. That's another story.
Love that. Thank you. Okay. The last question, we're coming down to the last question. Yeah, this one's quite interesting, actually. Just having kids myself, all of these are quite, talking about kind of creating wisdom for young people and creating the life that young people want to live and that they want to love. What advice would you give to young people listening today about defining success for themselves? And I think it's probably fair that everybody's picked up quite a lot about this. It's not CV attributes, is it? It's not like, it's the deeper, meaningful things, and creating a life that they love. So how could we give them advice about creating that life, and also how they think about success and what that might mean to them? And I'm going to start with you, Nova, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I would say intentionally find ways to practice joy and celebrate whatever milestones you make as often as you can. Even if the best thing I can do today is get myself out of bed and have a shower. Because sometimes that's all I can do. But just acknowledging your humanity and acknowledging the little stuff, because it matters. So anything you can do to celebrate, to cultivate joy within that. Like, there has to be, yes, there's skills, there's things you want to achieve. I think it's important. I understand it. But what are you doing for your joy? What are you doing to fill your cup? What are you doing to take care of yourself? Because when you're not well, you can't work, you can't produce, you can't take care of other people. So
lovely. And actually, following on from that, I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with social media. I think like the majority of us have. I love it and I really hate it. Yeah. I love it and then I really hate it sometimes. And I was following somebody, I'm not following them anymore. I literally just dipped in and out and then kind of left. It's not my space. But it was this whole idea of you know, I think they were saying about, oh, I can't stand it when people say you can't do anything. You can do everything you put your mind to, with this whole kind of very slightly toxic, positive mentality around, you know, but you, if you say you can't, then you can't, you know, but you must strive and you must be better and you must be this. And I was like, thinking back to times when I've lived with people with depression. And I'm like, so now you're putting the pressure of them not being able to do so on them as a person.
Yeah.
And that they're not, they're just lazy, or they just can't be bothered, or they're not pushing hard enough. When actually, to echo what you've just said, when they're unwell, they are unable to do these things. So the success for that person in that moment might be, I've brushed my teeth today. Go you. That is a pat on the back. You've got out of bed and you've brushed your teeth today.
Yeah.
Whereas for most people in that kind of, you know, their mentality is, oh, for goodness sake, that's a given. So being really clear in terms of what that success looks like for each and every individual, I think is super important.
And also acknowledging that it changes. Like, it will evolve, it will change. Like, things happen in our life, you know, it will change, and like being okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we're going from adolescence into adulthood, right? It's just a transition, and it's that up and down part of life, which we all have to go through, talking about resilience, bouncing back, etc., today. And what about you, Casey?
I think, I mean, maybe, well, I guess I was going to say maybe this is not about success, it's about happiness, but then I said success is about happiness. So I think for me, tell stories and make stories with each other, with your people. To my own proclivities, it would be like, you know, bad day at work, but I'm drinking one anyway. So I write something on it, you know. And when we poured the jar out, when we filled it, it was a random, like, you know, oh, do you remember that day? It wasn't your book got published, or it was your birthday, or it was this amazing thing. It was like something really stupid that I'd written on the cork, and then we'd laugh for like a long time, looking at, like, I can't believe, and what on earth made us think that was a good time to pop a cork and drink something when nothing good happened there. I was like, no, we're writing it down. And so just going back, and another thing I've done is I write like notes of memories that I put in a jar for my wife, and they're just like stupid stuff normally. But because they're captured, you hold the moment as well. And in the moment, some things are funny or amazing or kind of like you're proud of them. And if you don't really capture them properly, you can't look back on them with any clarity. But just sometimes a little note brings it all back in a very different way. So stuff like that. And I'm really disorganized, so I don't do stuff like that with any form of clarity or sense. But what is there is always a thing for joy. And it also helps us to realize, when I think about my own success, it's more the person that I'm not, who I could have been, because boy, you know, it could have been a very different person. And so sometimes it's none of the stuff you've achieved, it's all the stuff you didn't do. It's all the things, it's all the decisions that you didn't make that would have been bad decisions, harmful decisions, negative decisions. And so sometimes just sitting and going, I'm here, and I didn't do that, and I could have done that at that time, and I made that choice. Those are the successes. And because they don't register, because something didn't happen, we act like that's not a big success. But sometimes just not turning off the road or just not stepping through that door is a major achievement. Absolutely. So it's about marking and things as well.
That. And actually goes back to what Amelia was saying, I think earlier on, in terms of journaling, you know, writing down these things and writing down your experiences. And I'd also like to kind of just really quickly touch on that whole piece there. I was having a really interesting conversation with my kids the other day about stories that are lost in our families. My God, we didn't have phones when I was growing up, and I know it's not a major distraction, but I was told stories by my grandparents and told stories by my aunties and my uncles or the elders, and we're missing that. My mother happens to live next door in the annex to us, and I remember her coming around and a couple of weeks ago, and my son saying, I don't know about your sisters and brothers, Nan. And so she sat and told them about her sisters and brothers, and it was such a beautiful moment. And actually, talking about success, I now feel that's success of passing on our stories and passing on our family, you know, traditions. And yes, absolutely oral history. That for me is a success, because actually, if I hadn't have done that, these conversations wouldn't have happened. I could have lost the moment of sharing that time. So yeah, writing it down as you grow older and the things that you didn't do. Thank you so much.
Success. What, for a young person?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it would be confidence in conversations. Like, nothing is too big and nothing is too small to talk about, and I wish I'd known that when I was younger. I truly believe at my core, like any trauma we go through, big, small relationship issues, sexuality, bereavements, abuse, the power of having confidence to talk about it, if you feel like your shit is so heavy, and if you feel like, it's maybe not heavy enough to talk about, both of those, they're worth talking about. And we all should feel like we have permission to talk about them. We've got to find the right space. We've got to find, it could be a professional, it could be a friend, it could be online, it could be anonymous. But like, it's those times when it's like, maybe it's not that big, so I won't talk about it, I'll just keep it in. Or actually this self-hate, this blame I'm feeling is so big, no one's going to be able to hold it for me. And I wish I'd had more confidence in those times that people can hold it, as someone can. Like, ultimately, because it's so brilliant to talk about. And when you have the confidence to do it, it is healing. It does make the massive difference. I wish I'd known that younger. And so the confidence in conversation would be my one. Because I suppressed, and it massively, massively deteriorated my mental health. I had physical symptoms, I had everything. And it was just long, right? I got there now, yay. But it's taken ages, and I'm still learning. But like, that would be my thing of like, if I knew that when I was younger, I feel like I would have said more stuff just easier. And then it would have made some of the harder conversations easier to have. It's just like practice, right?
Lovely.
So,
excellent. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our questions. I'm a bit gutted because I could have carried on for ages. I think it's super important, especially for our young people, to understand that this particular talk was learning through wisdom to live a life you love. And I think as young people, there is this pressure to get it all right very quickly all of the time. And that's because of the noise. All right, there's a lot of noise saying that you should be here and it should be there and you should be doing that by now. It's noise. And if you recognise that for that, I think it takes the pressure off quite a lot. So just know that wherever you are in your young lives at the moment, you're on the right path. You're just doing the do, and you will get there. And actually, I wish that we'd have had this kind of conversation when I was younger, because I think it would have certainly helped me understand some of the things that I took for norm. You know, so just keep on keeping on. You'll get there, and some of these tips to help you along the way, so you don't end up in therapy when we say to people at 45 years old that, you know, all the stuff that you were living with before were not okay. All the things that you were dealing with before, if only there were therapeutic interventions, you might not be in the situation you're in now. So there's one thing, I think we were talking earlier on about envy of your generation. I'm envious of your generation because of the fact that you have opportunities to engage with things like this. So utilise it and you know, enjoy it.